is Basmatee Mohabeer and I'm from Guyana. I will talk about climate change and its impact on the capital city, Georgetown. Guyana is an English-speaking country located in South America, with most of its population living along the coastline and with a heavily forested inland area. Its capital city is Georgetown, which borders the Atlantic Ocean. Georgetown contains many wooden colonial buildings laid out in grids and interlaced with canals that provide drainage to a city that lies 1.4 meters below mean high tide level of the Atlantic Ocean. It has the main government offices and other key infrastructures like the main exporting port. Georgetown has a size of 70 kilometers with a diverse population of approximately 200,000 persons, which accounts for 25% of the country's total population based on 2012 census. It consists of the main economic activities, agriculture being the most prevalent. This area's economic activity contributes to 43% of the country's gross domestic product. The country, including its capital city, experiences a typically warm and tropical climate. The main weather system is the Intertropical Convergence Zone, and the major climate system is the El Nino Southern Oscillation. There are two dry seasons, February to April and July to November, with a mean annual air temperature ranges between 25 to 27.5 degrees Celsius. It is observed that since 1960, Guyana has had an overall average increase of 0.3 degrees Celsius, which is equivalent to 0.07 degrees Celsius per decade, with the highest change in the dry season of August to September rate. This rate is less than the global average warming according to the IPCC. There are also two wet seasons, April to July and November to January. Rainfall ranges between 250 to 450 millimeters of rain per month. Since 1960, the mean annual rainfall has increased at an average rate of 4.8 millimeters per month, or 2.7% per decade. According to the graph, there is no trend in the maximum 1-day or 5-day extreme rainfall. However, variability in rainfall has been responding to the El Nino Southern Oscillation cycle. Observing the patterns from the past, there are no significant trends. Georgetown has had a series of flooding. Flood in 2005 had a major impact on the city. Some areas reported about 150 centimeters of standing water for several days. This affected about 37% of the population in Georgetown. Damage estimated at $465 million US, which is equivalent to 60% of the gross domestic product. Damages impacted the agriculture sector specifically. Local experts said that the flooding is due to climate change, while other persons said it was because of the ending of an El Nino phase. The Guyana Second National Communication Document, which was submitted to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, included projections of Guyana's climate. The analyses were done using emission scenarios extracted from the fourth assessment of the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change. The data show by the 2030s, it is expected that nationally the annual temperature will increase by 0.8 to 1.8 degrees Celsius at a high emission scenario. Georgetown will experience an increased mean of 1.3 degrees Celsius by 2030s. By 2060s, increase will vary from 1.7 to 3.3 degrees Celsius, while temperature could go as high as 5 degrees Celsius by 2090s in a high emission scenario. August, September, October will be the hottest season throughout the century. In a medium emission scenario, temperature can reach as high as 4.6 degrees Celsius by 2090s, whereas it is expected temperature can increase by 0.4 to 3 degrees Celsius from 2030s to 2090s in a low emission scenario. This means there will be an increase in frequency of hot days and nights. Nationally, 79% of the days will be hotter by 2090s. Georgetown won't feel the full effect of the heat, but inland areas bordering Brazil will. Prediction shows that rainfall changes will be consistently negative for all season emission scenario. Georgetown monthly precipitation will decrease by 15% in 2030s, reaching 18% by 2090s. Temporal and spatial rainfall patterns will occur throughout the country by 2040 to 2069. Guyana inland may suffer water deficits in October and November, affecting water supply for agriculture, domestic, and industrial purposes. The fifth IPCC assessment report provided some updated projections. However, the government is currently reviewing it to make it country specific. However, predictions show similar trends like the IPCC fourth assessment report. The Canadian General Circulation Model and the Hadley Center General Circulation Model was used to estimate future sea level rise for areas surrounding the coastal zone in Guyana, including Georgetown. Generally, the Hadley model scenario gave a lower estimate of the sea level rise for the century than the Canadian model. It is expected by 2031 sea level rise would vary from 14 to 26 centimeters, with a rapid increase of variation from 25 to 51 centimeters by 2071. Storm surge height will vary from maximum 5.82 to 5.94 by 2031 and 5.93 to 6.19 meters by 2071 at a worst case scenario. There is no significant trend in the greenhouse gas emissions from the past, but this could be from lack of data. However, our emissions is expected to increase since the country has recently been considered the next big producing country in the Western Hemisphere. This could worsen the effects of climate change. Hadley models show that approximately 81,000 hectares of land can be lost by 2051 from the maximum sea level and storm surge heights. These land typically will be mostly agriculture, industrial, and residential lands. Agriculture is Guyana's largest economic sector, which contributes on average 20% to the gross domestic product and 40% major export earnings. It provides income for about 25,000 households, with approximately 90% concentrated in coastline areas, including Georgetown. Sea level rise and saline water intrusion will cause damage to crops and affecting the economy and livelihoods. It could also impact the fish and shrimp export, which amounts to approximately 4.6% of the country's total exports. Most people may need to relocate inland in the coastline, as coastline is at risk of being heavily eroded. This will damage mangroves vegetation, which helps protect the coastline. Houses closest to the coast built with weak materials are most vulnerable to flood-related damages. The Interdevelopment Bank Disaster Risk Exposure Index identified Guyana as the fourth most exposed country in the Latin American Caribbean region to natural disaster. The country is already considered poor. Climate change will only add additional burden. Sea level rise will also put pressure on the drainage system. Guyana boasts of its wealth in biodiversity and low deforestation rate, but this too is at risk. Birds migration will affect tourism on the coastline. Increasing diseases will put a strain on the health system in Georgetown, since the main health facility is found here. The 2005 floods illustrated the vulnerability of Guyana's health sector. Total cost was equated to 11% of the gross domestic product, according to 2004 prices. Having no electricity for an entire day in the city can be quite normal. Changes in temperature will likely worsen this problem. Higher temperatures are likely to increase electricity demand for cooling. This will also increase the country's dependence on imported petroleum fuel. Flooded roads could also affect trade of goods and services both locally and internationally. For example, most mining and forestry resources are transported to Georgetown from inland for export. Routes such as Georgetown and Latin Road linking Guyana and Brazil could be affected. So what have we learned about climate change and its It is projected temperature will increase 2 degrees to 5 degrees by the end of the century. Days and nights will be hotter. Rainfall will seem to remain unchanged or decrease slightly, while rainfall pattern will change considerably. The coastline will be affected tremendously, especially infrastructure and agriculture. The Climate Change Office is currently having consultations on establishing climate resilience strategy and action plan through synergies with the government, private sector, and civil society. I hope I help persons become more aware of the climate change and its effects in Georgetown and the importance for all Guyanese to take action to adapt or mitigate such effects.